Hello and welcome to Everyone Dies. This week we're talking about grief with Phil Cohen. Phil, known as the Grief Guy on social media, has agreed to join us each month for a chat about grief. His message about empowerment in the face of grief is something that may offer you hope in the face of loss. Thank you for listening to our podcast about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Mary Ann Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I used my experience from working as a nurse for 47 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life. Our main topic is in the second half, so you can just fast forward to get right to this week's topic if you need to, or if you want to. It's okay.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, and here to offer an every-person viewpoint to our podcast. We're both here because we believe that the more you know, the better prepared you are to make difficult end-of-life decisions. Also, this podcast does not provide medical nor legal advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
In the first half, Charlie has our recipe of the week and a story about Idaho. In the second half, we're talking with Phil Cohen. And in the third half, Charlie has a poem from D.L. White about his reaction to the death of the poet Andrea Gibson. So hi, Charles.
Hi, Mary Ann.
How are you?
Fine. I was just sitting here about to complain about something, but really, what's the point?
Really?
Yes.
You have your life, you have your
I have my girl. Who could ask for anything more?
Your swarthy...
What?
Your swarthy good looks?
Swarthy good looks. There we are.
Hey, did I ever tell you my joke about Idaho?
No.
So I had this patient when I worked at the VA, quite elder man, who every time, and when I say every time he came in to see me, he would tell me the same jokes. And the first time I was able to honestly laugh because they were corny. And the 10th time, I just, had to be the incredible actress that I am and laugh because he really wanted me to laugh. But the one joke that always cracked me up was if I've got one potato here and one potato here, how do you know which one is the prostitute?
I'm sorry, which one is the prostitute?
Yeah.
Okay. How?
It's the one that says, Idaho.
Moving on. Okay, that is cute. That is funny. Yeah. Our first half finds Everyone Dies in Idaho, where, according to Kootenay legend, a young Kootenay maid once fell in love with a Kootenay brave, or warrior. The chieftain of a tribe, hostile to the Kootenays, threatened war if he was not allowed to marry the maid, making it impossible for the young lovers to be together. Since the star-crossed maid and her brave knew they could never be married, they made a suicide pact and tied their wrists together, symbolic of their eternal union, and leapt off a cliff into Idaho's Spirit Lake. Legend has it that their spirits live on, and you can hear their mournful cries floating up from the water. Some have even claimed that on moonlit nights, they can be seen gliding across a lake in a phantom canoe. In an uneasy segue, our recipe this week is for frog eye salad, which might sound unusual, but in Idaho, it's a common dish at family gatherings, potlucks, and holiday dinners. This dessert-like salad is made with acini di pepe pasta, whipped topping, and a mix of fruits such as mandarin oranges, pineapple, and maraschino cherries. The dish has deep roots in the region. During the mid-20th century, it became especially popular among Mormon communities in Idaho, Utah, and surrounding states. Bon appetit, baby! Go to our webpage for this week's recipe for frog eye salad and additional resources for this program. This is the part where we ask for your financial support. Your tax-deductible gift will go directly to supporting our nonprofit journalism so that we can remain accessible to everyone. You can donate at www.everyonedies.org. That's every, the number one, dies.org, or at our site on Patreon under Everyone Dies. Everyone Dies is pleased to bring you an interview with Phil Cohen. After the death of his 14-year-old son, Perry, in a sudden accident at sea, Phil spent nearly a decade exploring every possible way to understand and heal from grief. Phil is now a grief coach, speaker, and creator behind The Grief Guy. His viral videos and TEDx talk, Transforming Grief, have helped countless grievers transform devastation into growth, connection, and meaning. His message is simple. Grief doesn't have to be a life sentence. It can become the soil where something beautiful grows. Here is this week's chat with Phil and Marianne.
We're here today with Phil Cohen, and his work has really started with the death of his son and his own work with grieving and his own work with trying to somehow deal with and make sense of, has to be the most horrific thing that a parent can go through. And he's learned a lot. And it's been 10 years since Perry died. Is that right, Phil?
That's right. Yep.
And 10 years seems like a long time, but there's dog years and there's grief years. So in grief years, Perry's only been dead probably 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, that can be, sometimes it seems like so soon and sometimes like a lifetime ago.
Yeah. And so that, sort of this warp change between time, grief doesn't pay attention to time, and it can, punch you in the gut just as forcefully as, right after you've heard the news as it can 10 years later.
Yes.
But Phil is working with people with who want to talk and want to learn about grief. And his goal is to bring hope and clarity to something that is so overwhelming and so isolating. And he's going to be joining us here at Everyone Dies for, an episode a month to help us grow with him and learn from him in terms of his work with grief and grieving. So, Phil, thank you so much for the courage to come and do this and to share everything, but what you know about grief and grieving.
Well, I really appreciate you having me to talk about these things because, one of the reasons why I even started this work is to really just to challenge the whole culture of silence surrounding grief because, this still doesn't really make sense to me how, this is something we're all 100% going to die. Why is it so hard for people to talk about? And as you mentioned, it could be so isolating and so lonely, and a time when you really need people. And for some reason, it scares them for whatever reason. So yeah, I appreciate you talking about that because it's important that people don't feel so alone.
Yeah, I always tended throughout my whole career to talk about things that people don't want to talk about. Made me extremely popular.
Yes.
So one of the things that you talked with me about is that grief changes your brain.
Yeah.
And we did a podcast about this, and we'll put it in the show notes for people who would like to listen to that.
Mm-hmm.
But can you tell us more about why people don't feel themselves after a loss, and what is that change that happens?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I think grief is so difficult for so many people is because it affects so many parts of your life instantly, like just even health, right? Spirit, mind, and body, like just that alone. We could talk about like how it affects your body, how it affects your mind, how it affects your spirit, but it also affects your relationships, right? Not only with the person that you lost, but the people that showed up and the people that you wish did that didn't. How the people that aren't talking to you about it, why it feels so isolating. It affects our identity. It affects our goals, like all at once, instantly. And it's like, how do you manage all that change all at once with so many major parts of your life, you know? So yeah, so when it comes to, the brain, when my son Perry died, I remember things like walking into a grocery store and just forgetting why I was there. I'd stand there like in the aisle staring at, cereal boxes like they were written in another language. I remember people were living, like feeling like people were living their normal lives, and I felt like I'd suffered some sort of head injury that no one can see, right? And that's part of grief in the brain. So that's really how grief affects your brain, right? So like your amygdala, that part that scans for threats, right? That's always on high alert. It's shouting, something terrible happened, don't relax. So you get flooded with fear and anxiety. And meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex, the front part of your brain that handles focus and decision making, slows way down. And that's one of the reasons why I couldn't make simple choices or remember why I went to the store. And I had clients even tell me they forgot to pick up their kids from school, or they burned their dinner because their mind was wandering. It makes you feel crazy, but you're not. And it's really just biology. And then the hippocampus, which helps us process memory and time, also gets scrambled. And that's why, just like we spoke earlier, it feels like it can happen yesterday and 10 years ago all at once. And as you alliterated, time doesn't move in a straight line anymore. So oftentimes when someone says something like, I feel like I'm losing my mind, I tell them, no, your brain is really just adapting. It's rewiring itself around, this hole of loss that was created. It feels chaotic, but it's not permanent. The brain is like plastic, and over time with small practices, things like writing things down so you can get them out of your head, learning how to ground your body, safe connection with people who get it, these pathways, they make new pathways. So oftentimes grief can make us feel like we're broken, but the truth is our brain is really just showing how deep, love can run. It's, proof of the bond, not a sign of weakness.
So if the brain can make new pathways, why can't or why doesn't it make a new pathway so that the grief doesn't hurt so bad?
Yeah. Yeah. The pain I feel is always going to be there, right? Like it never fully goes away. It's just learning how to integrate it, into parts of your life. And a lot of times, it comes down to what you're making it mean. Oftentimes, like I'll be talking to somebody and they make it mean something a lot more or a lot worse than what it really is. I mean, losing somebody sucks. I mean, and a child is like the worst. Many medical professionals have considered it like the worst thing a human being can endure. But it's also it is a death. Like I'm not saying that we evolved. I'm not trying to talk about Christianity or non-Christianity, that kind of thing. But just we we are made to adapt to these kinds of things, right? It's all about what's happening up here, what you're making it mean. And then there's things that you actually can do, like physically do. Like the worst thing that somebody can do is just do nothing and wait for time to heal. Like, because time doesn't heal all wounds. That is not good advice when it comes to grief. There are specific, actions that you can take to teach yourself to adapt to that type of pain.
So specifically, what could you tell me about 2 or 3 of those so that our listeners can, and all of us can give those a try?
There's so many different things. And one of the problems with grief is that, like, different things work for different people, right? And it's not like one thing either. And that's why I even hold these workshops, because you never really know what's going to work for you. But, to answer your question, in times when things feel really heavy, there are grounding exercises like just breathing. And I used to poo-poo all this stuff. Like, I often tell people, this may not be relevant, but just give some context. Like, meeting my father is like walking directly into a scene from The Sopranos. Like I grew up in like Italian New York, like you don't cry, like what, breathing, like forget about it. Like, so, I none of these things were like growing up were like seemed important, but once I was forced to learn about these things and started doing them, you realize how you can use your body to calm your nervous system because that's your nervous system is freaking out when you lose someone, especially if it was traumatic. There's things going on in your body that you don't even know, but if you know what's happening, like so many people don't want to get out of bed, right? So many people are unmotivated, and a lot of that is biological. And, when you don't want to get out of bed, and sometimes in those early days, like stay in bed, like, do it. It's all about survival at that point, right? Like just do what you got to do unless you're hurting yourself or somebody else in the process. But at some point you're forced to make a decision. Do I want to live here? Or do I want to do something, right? And because of, this thing is not meant, and anybody who's listening, I'm pointing at my brain, is not meant to keep you happy. It's meant to keep you alive, and it will sacrifice every bit of your happiness to achieve that goal. So, even though it's saying don't go outside, just lay down, just rest, you're being deceived. Like, start small, go outside, stand on your patio, let the sun hit your face, let the wind hit your face, let your nervous system know that you're alive and that, you're still part of what's going on here. Take a walk. One of the best things that people can do is just even journaling. Again, something I would poo-poo, but you have so much going on in your brain that when you start getting it out, there's something about that process. So like I can remember, early on, maybe a couple of years when I started going to therapy, and somebody recommended writing a letter to Perry, writing a letter, everything you wish you would have said, everything, and it was painful to think about, and it was painful to do. But I started, and then I remember like a couple of days later, I'd be like, oh, I wanted to tell him this about like, I wish I could have taught you how to shave, and I wish I didn't even get to teach you about girls and to see you get married, and everything I could think of, and all the I'm sorry's and I misses and all of those. And man, I'll tell you what, when it got to the point where it's like it's out. Like every time I'd remember something, I would add it like to it. There's something very freeing about getting it all out of here and onto a piece of paper where you can see it. So it's like and I can keep going on. Music for some people, get up, move your body, shake, just like literally just shake your body. Physiology, movement is what breaks the pattern. So there's a triad that I referred to. It's like, in any moment that you're in any single moment, you could change the way that you feel by focusing on one of three things. The first thing is your physiology. Like if I said there's a depressed person behind door number 3, would their head be up or down as you picture them? Likely it would be down. Would their shoulders be back and strong, or would they be slumped over? They'd be slumped over. Would their breathing be deep or would it be shallow? It would be shallow. So you're doing these things. You're shallow. You don't even realize. So, I mean, and everything I talk about, I try not to make theoretical. Like, literally fact check anything I'm saying. So it's been proven that if you stand for 2 minutes, like in a power pose, like Superman, with your hands on your hips and your feet set wide, and you breathe deep, do that for 2 minutes and tell me that you don't feel different. So things like that, like there's so many different things you can do. It's just, you have to do them instead of just getting crushed by the weight of sadness. Or for most people, now that I'm on this side and I get to talk to so many people, the one consistent I see is guilt. The guilt, some level of guilt, which is often in people's minds. They know it's not their fault, but they still hold themselves responsible.
Well, I can see as a parent that you think, well, this child is for me to protect.
Of course.
And to help grow and to help not you know,
100%.
kill other people or do anything bad, right?
Yes.
And if harm comes to them, even through no fault of our own, isn't it just natural as a parent to say,
yes.
what did I do? I mean, where did I not do what I should have done?
Yeah.
Because now this child is dead. Isn't that normal?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely normal. 100%. I did it. I mean, it's yes. It's not only the parents, it's the siblings and other people too. That, oftentimes I'll speak to somebody and wind up talking to the whole family, and everybody feels a level of guilt for their own reason. But in most cases, it's one of two things. So it's either, you feel guilty because either one, you actually did something, like you actually contributed to this person dying, which in 99.99% of the cases is not the case, even though people think it is, but it's not. In the vast majority of cases, like mine and most people, you feel a level of guilt for that reason, especially if it's a child, because it's our primary responsibility to keep them safe. And it's your innate instinct as a parent to protect them, and you feel like you failed. Yeah. But if it were, I know this may seem extreme, but if we were in a court, a court of law, and I had to prove that you're not guilty. I understand that you feel guilty, but you did not cause this. They know they would lose because they didn't cause it, but yet you still feel it. And so, why? I even got curious. I got like, why does everybody feel guilty, right? And in these stories you always hear that, well, if I only would have, and maybe if I didn't or if I didn't take that turn, or whatever it may have been, and through everything that I've learned, what I've found is that our brains it's easier for us to believe that we had some sense of control, like that you actually could have stopped this person that maybe committed suicide if you said this one thing, or if you did this one act or didn't do this one thing, that maybe they would still be here, or if I didn't take that trip. And that is natural. It's easier for us to try and think that we could have stopped it than to believe that this world is just freaking chaotic, it's random, and you have control over nothing, which is the fact,
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's people stay in this loop of if I only, and it's in most cases, if you replace if only with, even if, the outcome would have still been the same. In most cases, like even if you did show up that time, they still would have taken their own life, because mental health is extremely difficult to understand, right? So, yeah, that's, I guess.
I think that as human beings, we don't want to believe that the world is random.
Yeah.
That, we did a series on getting cancer, and getting cancer is a random mistake in the genetics, in the genes. But we don't want to believe that. We want to have the feeling that we have some control in the world. And I guess maybe that's how we get through the day, is to believe that we do, but I don't believe we have control.
We don't. I mean, I guess, the argument that I'm playing in my mind is that, there's some sense of control as to, like, if you don't smoke and you eat right, and yes, you could still get cancer, but like there is some, what's the word I'm looking for? Agency. Like we do have some control over that, right? But like what happened with in so many tragedies, people will often blame themselves, like car accidents. If I only would have made them stay home that night, if they only would have taken the other car, something like that, and I get it. Like I get the feeling, but um, in most cases, it's not your fault, you know. And most people just you need to give yourself that permission to know that it's not your fault. Yeah, you know. And then there's the part where so many people don't feel like they're allowed to feel joy anymore. Their child is
Mm.
gone, their person's gone. You know, I shouldn't be allowed to be happy, which is also not true. Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes in talking with people, I get the sense that either they wish it was them that died or they want to die because they don't want to be in what I've heard is to be in a world where this
Yes.
person no longer is.
Yes.
But it seems though that we can honor that person's life and honor that person's death by finding a way maybe to make other people's lives better.
Yes.
Like we don't need to sit in the house and grieve full time or remove any and every drop of joy and love out of our lives.
No. No. Yes. I mean, sitting in the house and grieving full time, that is a sure way not to heal. I mean, you know,
Mm.
so even like you look at, let's say that, you know, the Jewish tradition of sitting Shiva, right?
Mhm.
Which, you know, I think is such a beautiful tradition. I think that, you know, we've
Yeah.
lost something in this. When you look at the process of what they do through Shiva, it's something we should bring back in some sense because there's so much that makes sense to it. You know, the process of actually letting the world know, right? Like I lost someone. I am grieving. They sit on the floor. They don't talk. People bring them food, and there's a process. You don't just walk into somebody's house. You cleanse yourself. So the way to think about that is before you walk into somebody's house who lost somebody, think about like the things that you're going to say, you know, and how you're going to treat this person. Just, you know, look inward first. You're not allowed to talk to them first unless they talk to you. You know, thinking about like, you know, just don't say random things, you know, and help them. Look for ways to help them. Then at the end of 7 days, they're supposed to go outside and take a walk that represents, you know, coming back into society. Not to mean like, you know, grief's gone, good. I'm gonna, you know, not. But it's just, you know, it's more, you know, representational. But it's taking the time to at least do the process, you know, do something,
Mhm.
you know, and then also the way people treat you. But yeah, sitting inside is a sure way to go down quickly by yourself. In the beginning, I get it. I did it like I didn't want to be around anybody, things like that. But then over time, I started to notice that it's got worse, right? Like I was turning too many things down. I didn't want to talk to people, and that's never a good sign. Yeah. So, you know, with things like this, especially if I'd say to anybody who's listening who's new in grief, you know, who's just getting started, um, definitely don't do it alone. It's, you know, if you have to in the beginning, do it alone, but then think about, you know, a couple, if you're blessed enough to have some good friends or family, somebody that, if you have somebody that's funny, that makes you laugh like a hyena, think about them. Somebody that's just a really good listener that won't judge you, think about them, you know, because if you don't ask for help, many people won't offer it because they're afraid to. They want to help you. They just don't know what to do or what to say. So they don't say anything because they think it's going to make you scared. So, you know, oftentimes when I'm coaching people it's okay to ask. It's important to ask for help, you know, and to know how to ask for it, you know, say, can you just get me out of the house today? I just need to get out of here, you know,
Mhm.
but the right person. It's, you know, the community matters in the beginning because too many people try to rush people through grief, try to just, you know, fix them. And that's not the way to do it. But having somebody around is important.
Can I go back? You were talking a few minutes ago about physiology and how movement breaks the pattern of the grief, and you said it's like a triangle with the physiology at the top or at one of the points. What are the other 2 points of the triangle?
Yeah. The other one, is what you're focusing on, right? Because where focus goes, energy flows, right? Are you focusing on everything that you have or that you don't have? Are you focusing on everything that you lost? Because I can choose to focus on all of the parts of me that died with Perry, right? Like I can choose to focus on that and sit in that. And sometimes I do. Or I can choose to focus on all the parts of him that he left in me. And I choose to focus on the latter more than the former. So, there's so much that we don't have control over, as we just talked about, right? Like we don't have control over what someone does or what's going to happen or the economy, the weather, whatever it might be. But what we think about, what we focus on, and also, the words that we use, which is the third component of the triad. Like what are you saying? Because so many people will say things like, I'm broken. My life is over. Your life may never be the same. It won't be the same without that person. But it's not over, right? And you're not broken. So, any of the I am statements are like very powerful. So you got to be careful what you say out loud, so you can, yes, you could be in a lot of pain, but you're learning how to carry it, So you just have to be, those 3 things, change your body, change how you're focusing on it, and change the words that you're using. If you change any one of those 3 things, it will affect the state that you're in.
And if changing one of those, will it have an effect on the other 2?
I mean, it may, but I always start with physiology, just because laying down and doing something is never the same as getting it into your body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's even making noises, things like that. These are like they go into like the deepest parts of our brain, So like, doing something like a physiological sigh, like a specific type of grounding technique, where it's like you breathe in deep as you can, and then take a little bit more in, and then exhale even longer than you inhale. But as you exhale, you're like going, ah, like you feel silly when you do it, but like when you read the science about it, what that does, it helps release a lot of this stuff.
Mm.
Yeah.
We should do a sighing support group.
Yeah.
Do they have things like that?
I don't know, but I mean, these are things like I get people, in the beginning of my workshop, I'll say that we're going to do things that you haven't done before. It may be a little uncomfortable, but I often say what growing up, my best friend's father is an Egyptian immigrant, brilliant man. Oh my gosh, super successful. And he said something to me at a young age that stuck with me. Something I was scared to do, but it was going to improve my life. And, he looked at me and said, if you can't, then you must. If there's anything that's like standing in your way and it's going to make your life better, but you're scared, whether it's to go talk to a beautiful woman or to go ask for something that you need, anytime you feel I can't, instantly go take action on it, and that's something I've done, my whole life, and has probably been one of the biggest sagest pieces of advice I've ever gotten. So, I try to plant that seed early on, because you don't know what's going to work for you and what's not going to work for you. And sometimes you can find your comfort zone just outside of your comfort zone if you're willing to look there.
That was really wise advice, wasn't it? I mean, you think of all the things, even standing on a diving board, with all your friends down in the water. It's like you say to yourself, I can't do this. And you really have to say to yourself, you must do this, because there's so much at stake with your buddies down in the water.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say that, because almost exact experience happened to me. Like probably 15 years ago, my brother Do you know who Tony Robbins is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my brother's worked for Tony Robbins for a long time, and he's like these like this super like uh, adrenaline junkie, like loves to do things that are crazy. Anyway, long story short, he said, "Hey, you want to come with me to Fiji?" I said, "Yes." He said, "With one condition, you have to jump out of an airplane with me." And I'm
Oh,
scared of heights. Like I don't like I'll do it, but I don't like it. So leading up to it, uh, I'm like go in there. I told all my friends, told my son, I'm like I'm going to do this thing. So my point is that it was scarier for me to think about going home and saying that I wimped out to my son and to all my people than to jump out. Like I knew I had to jump. So yeah, in those cases, like when you're scared, you almost have to find something scarier than not doing it, Yeah.
how did jumping out the plane go for
Oh
you?
my gosh. There is video of it. I have a video. It's hysterical because so we did it from 15,500 feet, which is, to give you perspective, generally clouds are around 7,000 feet. So, as the plane was going up, the doors opened and, we broke through the clouds. And one of the guys was like, "All right, we're almost halfway there." I was like, "Oh, halfway?" Like I was already like, oh my God. But as I jump out of the plane, the fear, pure terror, like you can see absolute terror on my face for like 2 seconds, and then it's all smiles. And I'll tell you what, when you're afraid of something, when you're unbelievably afraid of something and you do it anyway, there is a power on the other side of that I can't explain. Growing up, I smoked pot, I've done drugs. Like the high that I'm talking about, I got from the jumping out of that airplane is something very different. You feel like you can accomplish anything. For like a week, I was like on this high. So also taught me like when you're afraid, you got to keep doing it. You see, there's rewards for breaking through that fear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's why I think
And it was probably a great lesson for your son too, is first of all, for you to say, "I'm afraid of this."
Yeah.
And then second of all, to be able to come home and say, "I was afraid,
Yeah.
but I did it."
Yeah. Yeah. And, sometimes that weighs heavily on me too, because I think about the moments, everything that happened with Perry. Yeah. I know that my crazy spirit was in him too, but, in that moment, uh, from everything I know, I believe he did not want to be on that boat in that moment, but he didn't want to say no. Yeah. But that's another story. But yes, the point is that when you do things that you haven't done before, oftentimes, our brain automatically goes to strategy, right? Like how? What's the how? So another thing I mentioned in my workshops too is right at the very beginning is, I want you to write down the tyranny of how. It is because if you worry about the how, it oftentimes the result doesn't show up. If you worry about the how, you have to be more concerned with the why, right? Like why? So one question as part of the workshop, I'll email in advance is to email me back your why. Why are you doing this? Why are you investing time and resources to go through this 12-week program? What is the outcome that you want? And what is the outcome if you keep living the same way you are now? How will that affect your life? How will that affect your job? How will it affect your relationships? And how will it affect it if you learn to carry this with grace and power? How will it affect it then? So my point is when your why is big enough, the how just shows up.
Well, I think that that's a profound way to end our interview and to give, our listeners, what I'd like you guys to do is to really think about what is your why. And if you are able to approach and understand your why, does the how show up? Does Phil right? And I think it's a worthwhile lesson for us to learn in terms of, I always say, trust the universe. And sometimes the things that happen within the universe, we say, "I'm not trusting that." I've gotten hurt. I've gotten, loss. These things have happened to me when the universe is allowed to take over. But Phil, do you think that the universe will bring people there? How?
Well, you look at every great story, right? Like every great book or a lot of great movies, and you look at something horrible that happened, and a villain in a story generally is somebody that said, "The world, the universe has hurt me, so I'm going to hurt it back." But the hero is somebody who says, "The world has hurt me, but I'm going to do everything I can to not let somebody else feel that pain." So you have a choice. Do you want to be a hero or a villain in some cases? I'm not saying that you have to go one way or the other. But it's, yeah, I mean, we're never going to have the, specific reasons why things happen, right? Like, we'll never know. Like, I'll never have all my answers as to why. And while why is a reasonable question to ask in the beginning, like, because there may be answers there, like why this happened, there may be valid answers there. It wasn't until I started asking, like, okay, well, what now? Like, what can I do, that things started to change.
And that's, I think it's hard to think about the what now when you're obsessing over the why.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to put that package down so that your hands are free to pick up that that how piece, that how package, because that's got some pretty good stuff in it, and the world has some pretty good stuff in it. Yeah. Staying isolated and staying hurt is not really to our advantages, and in my own way of thinking, I think that it's a dishonor to the person who's died. It's like, why would you give up your life just because I'm not around?
Yeah, I'm Christian by faith, so for me, in my mind, I know where Perry is, and I believe I will see him again, and that definitely helps for those people. I think, um, but the fact is, they're not here, right? And you are, and it's there. If you're just staying inside and one look at the science, it's proven that it's way worse than drinking, like, I forgot how many numbers of beer. Like, it's one of the worst things you can do is to isolate yourself. But the fact is, it's not, it's not serving you. It's not serving anybody that loves you. And it's, as you just said, it's not serving the person that you lost. And sometimes the way that we grieve can honor or dishonor the person that we've lost. So, like, I know I will see Perry again. And for me, it's like, I look forward to that moment, but while I'm here, I still live every moment I can to help other people, and to live and enjoy my life, because grief and joy can coexist. There are days when I cry, and there are days when I have fun, but I don't let the having fun part get me down or think that I'm not allowed to do that. Yeah. There's so much here. I talk a lot because there's so much I want to say. There's like so much I want to share with people because there's so much to know, and I'm so frustrated with people just being handed 5 stages and told to just give it time.
Yeah, because it doesn't work that way, and it's really a disservice. Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you're going to be with us on a monthly basis and share your wisdom and share your ideas. And my hope is that for our listeners is that they get a different perspective and maybe take some steps to grieve a little differently and be healthier and happier in this world. Yeah. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again in a few weeks.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that interview, Phil and Marianne. For our third half, I have a poem from D.L. White. D.L. White is an Anglo-Irish poet and author currently living in the UK. The poem is about finding out the poet Andrea Gibson had died. Andrea Gibson, I'm making my son's lunch when I find out you've died, cutting up carrot and cucumber while crying. He tilts his tiny head, furrows his precious brow, and asks me, Daddy, are you all right? And I remember what you said about truth. Even when the truth isn't hopeful, the telling of it is. So I tell him, no, I'm not all right. A poetry angel has taken flight, and Daddy is very sad about it. I know it sounds far-fetched, but I think he understands in the way trees understand soil. He opens his arms wide as a bridge and lunges for a hug. And I remember what you said about heartbeats. If you were to press your heart close up against somebody else's heart, eventually your hearts will start beating at the same time. I feel a desperate instinct to retreat. Take my sorrow to the spare room, close the curtains, turn off the lights, hide from anyone who might dare to care about me, to look at my collection of wounds, tired and alone. But I remember what you said about relationships. We gather each other up. We say the cup is half yours and half mine. We say alone is the last place you will ever be. I call my wife and tell her about a growing ache in my stomach. How unfair it is that a poet of such monumental importance now only exists in memories. But she reminds me what you said about death. Dying is the opposite of leaving. I want to echo it through the corridor of your temples. I am more with you than I ever was before. My heart swells grateful as I realize you're not gone. You're still right here, in books on my shelf, videos in my feed, words etched in my skull, hope echoing through my bones. You are still here, more than ever. How lucky I am, how privileged we all are, who have glimpsed your soul through a miraculous lens, a pen dripped in cosmic ink, a voice so authentic it could have been wombed in stars, an immutable spirit set wild and free. How inspiring, how wonderfully inspiring you are. I flick through your books, too afraid to land on a single page, in case the words spontaneously combust upon reading, or sprout wings, escape their paper prison to be free, as words should be, with you in the afterwards. What I'm most afraid of is the words won't be the same shape ever again, that the weight of loss presses them into crueler, cruder, angrier creatures, that the meaning will be tainted by mourning. I feel a tension in the meat of my heart, not a rip or tear, but the start of a long pull. When it releases, the flesh will be softer, slacker. And I remember what you said about hearts. In the end, I want my heart to be covered in stretch marks. I ideate myself out of existence, as I often do when down dark. The tricksy little imp, whispering from the back seat, implores me to spin the car off a cliff, to join you. And I remember what you said about grief, that every falling leaf is a tiny kite with a string too small to see, held by the part of me in charge of making beauty out of grief. So I'm writing. I don't know if it's beautiful yet, not the way you are. Your consonants dance with your vowels. Your sentences have curves and edges. Your poetry can sail a ship or bend a spine, dress a wound or slice the moon, while mine seem edgeless by comparison. And I remember what you said about creating. We have to create. It's the only thing louder than destruction. So today, like millions of others whose hearts you squeezed, I'll create so that I'm not destroyed. And I'll let my heart break. Because I remember what you said about breaking hearts. Let your heart break so your spirit doesn't. And so ends this week's episode. Please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. This is Charlie Navarrete. And from stand-up comedian Susan Rice, I'm 70 years old. Nobody gets married for the first time at 70. No, unless there is a verified pension and a diagnosis.
And I'm Marian Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember, every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.